Hi guys, today I bring you a story of hunter Kenneth Anderson called the Man-Eater of Jowlagiri. He was born in India near Hyderabad and was of Scottish origin. He was based in South India and had written many spine-chilling stories showcasing his efforts to save human lives from man-eaters. His descriptions of the jungles of South India was very minute and elaborate, which gave the readers a very clear vision or understanding of the whereabouts he operated in. So let's start with the story. It was a moonlit night, and the moon shone over the tropical jungle of South India that consisted of hills and valleys. The forest appeared vividly before the eyes. The forest grasses and leaves of the giant trees all appeared clearly. But where the rays of the moon cannot reach, there lay a greater mystery in the dark shadows below, perhaps concealing a beast of prey, a watchful deer, or a lurking reptile, all moving around individually in search of food. In the Jowlagiri forest range, everything appeared peaceful, yet there was danger everywhere and murder was afoot. There lay hidden a trio of poachers who decided to get some meat for themselves. They possessed between them two matchlocks of vintage quality. They very clearly constructed a hide on the sloping banks of a waterhole and had been positioned in it since sunset, intently watching out for the deer, which sooner or later would show up to quench their thirst at the waterhole. The hours moved on. The moon was at the full and had reached mid sky, and the scene was as bright as day. Suddenly, from the thicket of evergreen saplings on their left, there could be heard the sound of violently rustling leaves and deep throated grunts. The hunters thought that there was most probably a wild pig making that noise. The poachers waited, but the beasts, whatever they were, did not break cover. Becoming impatient, Muniappa, who was the marksman among the three of them, decided to risk a shot. He raised his matchlock and waited till a dark shadow, deeper than its surroundings, became more evident and fired a shot. There was a snarling roar and a lashing in the bushes that was followed by a series of coughing hoofs and then complete silence. Not pigs, but a tiger, as the sounds revealed to them. Fearfully and silently, the three poachers beat a hasty retreat to their village to spend the rest of the night in anxiety as to the result of their act. But next morning, it turned out to be apparently well because it was a male tiger that lay dead, who was just in his prime of life. The chance shot from the ancient musket had hit straight at his heart and killed him instantly. So that day, Muniappa and his friends turned out to be the unsung heroes of the village. But the next night produced a complete different story. With the sun set, there came an angry and urgent call of a tigress seeking her dead mate. Since it was the mating season and this tigress had just acquired her companion the night before, Sosi was decidedly annoyed at his unaccountable absence, which she quite rightly connected with the interference of human beings. Night after night for a week, she continued her uneasy movements, calling by day from the depths of the forest, and in darkness roaring almost at the outskirts of the village itself. Then a keen and enthusiastic hunter named John Leonard was summoned to the village by an urgent letter. He was a young person and was quite keen at securing a trophy. He arrived at the village on the morning of the eighth day and acquainted himself with the situation. He was told that the tiger wandered everywhere, and seeing her many pug marks on the lonely path of the forest bungalow, he decided to try his luck that evening. He concealed himself behind an anthill that stood conveniently beside the path. By 5 o'clock, the minutes quietly passed by. At about 6:15 p.m., dusk was starting to fall. Suddenly, there was a faint rustle of leaves, and a loose stone rolled down the bank a little to his right. Leonard strained his eyes for the first sight of the tigress, but nothing happened. The minutes passed by again, and then he found out that, rapidly moving along the edge of the road towards him, the tigress was on the same side as him. He could just see the form of the tigress approaching. He quickly transferred the stock of his rifle to his left shoulder and, leaning out as far out from his protecting bush as possible so that he might be able to see more of the animal, he fired at her chest. If it would have gone a little to the right, it would have turned out to be a fatal shot, but it missed the heart to which Leonard had aimed to shoot. As it happened, Leonard's bullet plowed deeply into the right shoulder of the animal. It caused the beast to roar loudly before it crashed away and disappeared into the jungle. Disappointed bitterly, Leonard decided to wait till morning so that he could follow the trail. Next morning, when he arrived at the spot where he had shot the tigress, he found that there was blood lying around in abundance everywhere. But he could not follow her trail because of the difficult and rocky country with densely wooded ravines and close, impenetrable shrubbery. Months passed by, and now the scene changes to another village called Sulekanta. It was situated deeper in the forest and located about 7 miles from Jowlagiri. There was a little temple which was occasionally visited by pilgrims from the surrounding region. Three people, a man, his wife, and their son, aged 16, were returning to their home after having finished offering their prayers in the temple. Hardly a quarter mile from the temple, there was a wild tamarind tree under which they had to pass. The boy lingered to pick up some half ripe tamarind fruit. The parents heard a low growl, which was followed by a piercing and agonizing scream. They looked back and were shocked to see their son was being bodily carried away in the jaws of a tiger as it leapt into a nala bordering the lonely path. The aged couple bravely turned back and shouted abuse at the tiger, but these were answered by two more shrieks from their only son, and then there was silence again. Thereafter, the operations of the tiger expanded into a wide area where death followed death. It extended from Jowlagiri in the extreme north to the cattle pen of Gundalam, some 30 miles to the south, and from the borders of Mysore state, 20 miles to the west, to the main road to Denkaflikota for about 45 miles of its length. About 15 victims had fallen a prey to this tiger. Among them were three girls. One had just got married. Anderson received an urgent summons from his friend, the sub collector of Hosur, to rid the area of the man eating tiger. He journeyed to Jowlagiri, where the sub collector had told him the trouble that had begun. He pieced together the facts of the story and reached a logical conclusion that this man eater was not a tiger but a tigress, and the one that had been robbed of her mate by the poachers and was later wounded by Leonard's plucky but unfortunate shot. From Jolagiri, he walked to Sulekanta in the hope of coming across the fresh pug marks of the marauder. But he was unlucky, as no kills had occurred at that place in recent day, and whatever tracks there had been were obliterated by passing herds of cattle. So he decided to move to the south to Gundalam, some 23 miles away from the affected area, and decided to pitch camp there, since it was at this cattle pen that the majority of kills had been reported. 7 herdsmen had been accounted for in the last 4 months. He was provided with 3 fat buffalo cubs as bait by his sub collector friend. He proceeded to tie them out at likely spots in the hope of securing a kill. He tethered the first buffalo calf a mile down the river bordering Gundalam. At that time, it was a mere trickle of water at a point where the river was joined by a tributary named Sijhalla, down which the tigress was reported to keep her beat. The second calf was tied along the path to the neighboring village called Ancheti, which was 4 miles away. He tied the third calf close to the watershed where both herdsmen and cattle obtained their daily supply of drinking water. He attended to the securing and comfort of these baits himself. He spent the next 2 days in walking through the forest in every direction, armed with his .405 Winchester, in the hope of picking up fresh pug marks or perhaps of seeing the man eater herself. On the second day, in the early morning, he located the footprints of the tigress in the soft sand of the Gundalam River. During the night, she had descended and walked along the river past the waterhole and his buffalo bait, which was evident by her footprints. She had stopped for a while to look at, but did not touch the bait. She went up and across a neighboring hill and went to Ancheti. There the ground became too hard for further trekking. He was out searching again on the third morning. He was preparing to have a hot bath and have an early lunch when a group of men, accompanied by the headman of Ancheti, arrived and informed him that the tigress had killed a man early that morning at a hamlet scarcely a mile south of Ancheti. Apparently, a villager, after hearing restless sounds from his penned kettle, had gone out at dawn to investigate the cause and had not returned. Thereafter, his brother and son had followed to find out the cause of his absence, and at the outskirts of the cattle pen had found the man's blanket and his staff and the indistinct claw marks of the tigress's hind feet as she reared to attack her victim in the hard earth. After seeing these claw marks, they became alarmed and did not dare to follow further up and went back to the hamlet and then to Ancheti. There they gathered a large number of people and, accompanied by the headman, they moved with urgency to find Kenneth Anderson. Skipping the bath, he followed a quick lunch and hastily set off to Ancheti and the hamlet. From the spot where the tigress had attacked and had killed her victim, tracking became extremely difficult, tiring, and required a great amount of physical and mental effort and endurance, and moreover slow, owing to the hard and stony nature of the ground. Plus, it was evident that no sound was made by the unfortunate man. In this case, the abundant and overflowing quantity of thorny bushes among the shrubbery assisted them, for on looking around, they found shreds of the man's loincloth pierced through on the thorns as the tigress carried him away. Had the circumstances not been so tragic, it would have served to enlighten us to know how the exceptionally intelligent animal had detoured to avoid such thorns on finding out the amount of obstruction they would have offered to her. About 300 yards away, she had dropped her burden under a thicket at the foot of a small fig tree, probably with the intention of starting her mill. Then she had changed her mind, or perhaps she had been disturbed by something, for she had picked up her victim again and continued her retreat towards a deep nala that ran southwards towards the main Kaveri River some 30 miles away. After that, tracking became easier, for the tigress had changed her hold from the man's neck and throat, which had accounted for the lack of the sight of any blood trail. Hunters and trackers use it to follow the path of an injured target. Now she held him by the small of his back. After that, drops of blood and smears across the leaves of bushes and thickets made it comparatively easy for them to follow the trail, and after going on for another 100 yards, they had found the man's loincloth, which had completely unwound itself from the dead man and was hanging from a protruding sprig of wait-a-bit thorn. Thus they continued and reached the nala, where in the soft, dry sand they saw the pugmarks of the tigress very clearly imprinted on it. There was a slight drag mark on one side, evidently caused by one of the man's feet, trailing downwards as he was carried. After that, Anderson did not feel the necessity of a tracker to accompany him. It would be a needless risk, and the numbers would create only disturbance and confusions. After signaling to the people to remain where they were, he crept forward very cautiously on his own. The progress was undoubtedly very slow, for he had to carefully scan the heavy undergrowth on both banks of the Nala, where the tigress might have been lurking and waiting to put an end to her pursuer. Then he had crossed two bends in the Nala when he sighted a low outcrop of rock jutting into the Nala bed itself. Keeping as far as he could to the opposite side of the rock, he increased his approach as quietly and carefully as possible to avoid detection. A closer and detailed examination revealed a dark object on the far side of the rock, and this duly proved to be the body of the unfortunate victim. The tigress had already made a fair meal out of the victim. She consumed about half her prey in the process, severing one leg from the thigh and one arm. He made sure that she was nowhere around in the vicinity. He returned to where the men were waiting and summoned to them to the spot to help him construct some sort of place where he might sit up and await the return of the tigress to her mill, and he was confident that she would do so before sunset that day. They couldn't imagine a more unsuitable spot for sitting up. There was a complete absence of trees on which a machan could be constructed, and it soon became evident that only two possibilities were there. One possibility was to sit close to the opposite bank of the Nala, from where the human victim was clearly visible. The other was to ascend the sloping outcrop of rock to a point about some 10 feet above the bed of the Nala, where a natural ledge had formed about 4 feet from its upper edge. He rejected the first plan as being too dangerous in dealing with the case of a man eater, after which it left him with the prospect of going for the second option. From the position of the rock from where he would be sitting, he would not only be able to view the dead human body, but also the whole length of the Nala up to its bend, in the direction from which he had come, and for about 20 yards in the other direction, from where it swung abruptly to the right. The men immediately set to work. They silently and quickly cut a few thorny bushes that matched the same variety as grew in the immediate vicinity of the rock, so as not to create a contrasting background. They deftly and cunningly arranged these below the ledge so that he would not be visible in any direction from the Nala itself. Fortunately for him, he had the forethought to bring along his blanket, water bottle, and torch with him, although there would not be the requirement for the last of these during the major part of the night, as the moon was almost nearing a full and would rise comparatively early. By 3 p.m., he was up in his place, and the men left him and was instructed by him to return the next morning with a flask of hot tea and sandwiches for a quick snack. The afternoon passed slowly by. The heat from the blazing sun beat directly on the exposed rock and bathing him in sweat. He looked down the Nala in both directions. All was still, and nothing disturbed the rays of shimmering heat that arose from the baked earth. No vultures were seen to be circling around or present, which meant that the position where the tigress had left the body beneath the sharply sloping rock was not visible from the sky. At about 5 p.m., a crow spotted it, and by persistently cawing, it attracted its mate, but was afraid of the human scent and did not begin to pick the kill. Time passed by, and the sunset looked like a fiery ball under the distant rim of the forest clad hills. The crows flew away, one after the other, maybe to settle somewhere else where, out of hunger, they would become courageous enough to face the feared smell of human beings. The call of the jungle cock broke order in all directions as a farewell to the dying day, and the shrill meow sound of a peacock sounded from down the dry bed of the stream. He welcomed the sound and presence of the peacock, for he knew that in the whole forest there was no alert watchman than a peacock that could be found, and he would be warned of the tigress's approach should he see her. The expected time was arriving, and he sat there intently alert and awaited the return of the man eater. But as he waited, nothing happened, and he heard the peacock flapping heavily away, and dusk followed, vanquishing the day. Fortunately, the moon arose early, and her silvery sheen restored a little of his former range of vision. The birds of the day went to their place of shelter to rest or sleep, and their places had been taken by the birds of the night. He could hear the persistent sound, chuck chuck chucku, of the nightjars echoed along the nala as these early harbingers of the night sought their insect prey along the cooling banks. Time passed by again, and then a deathly silence fell upon the scene. Not even the chirrup of a cricket disturbed the stillness, and the nightjars went off elsewhere in search of food. Suddenly, a loud belling of an alarmed sambar broke the silence of the night and was persistently followed by a succession of similar calls from a spot he judged to be about half a mile away. These were followed by the sharp cry of spotted deer and echoed up the nala by a restless brain fever bird in his weird call, brain fever, repeated in rising crescendo. He breathed a sigh of relief as he felt he had been alerted and braced his nerves and muscles for the final action. The night watchmen of the jungle had faithfully accomplished their task, and he knew that the tigress was approaching the spot where she had left her kill and had been seen. The calls then gradually died away. This meant that the tigress had passed out of the range of the callers and was now close by. He strained his eyes on the bend to the right, some 20 yards down the nala, around which at any moment he expected the man eater to appear. But nothing happened. 30 minutes passed, then 45, by the hands of his wristwatch, clearly visible in the moonlight. Strange, he thought. The tigress should have appeared long ago. She would not take 45 minutes to cover half a mile. Then a horrible feeling of imminent danger came over him. Many times before his sixth sense had warned him in good stead when he wandered around in the forests of India, Burma, now known as Myanmar, and on the South African belt. He was not in the slightest doubt that somehow, in spite of taking all the precautions, complete screening, and absolute stillness, the tigers had somehow discovered his presence and was at that moment probably stalking him and preparing for a final spring. Hunters who knew the jungle well, they think quickly in moments of danger. It is not braveness that makes the mind think quickly, for at that moment Anderson confessed that he was very afraid and could feel beads of cold sweat trickling down his face. He knew that the tigress could not be on the Nala itself, or below him, or he would have seen her long before. She might have been on the opposite bank, hidden in the dense undergrowth, and watching his position, but somehow he felt that her presence there would not account for the acutely growing sense of danger that increasingly troubled him. Suddenly it hit him home that the 4 foot wall of rock behind him prevented him from looking backwards unless he raised himself to a half crouching, half kneeling position. It would make a steady shot impossible in that position. On the contrary, it would completely give away to where he was to any watcher on the opposite bank or on the Nala bed itself. He cursed himself for this lack of forethought, which now threatened to become his undoing. As he hesitated for another second, a thin trickle of sand slid down from above, probably dislodged by the killer, which signaled now that it was very close above him and was preparing herself for a final spring. He realized that he could not hesitate any longer. He forced his numb legs to raise him to a half crouching position, simultaneously sling the cocked .405 around till the end of the muzzle was in line with his face. Then he raised himself a fraction higher till both his eyes and the muzzle came above the ledge. The sight that followed was really fearful. There was a tigress, hardly 8 feet away, and extended on her belly in the act of creeping down the sloping rock towards him. As their eyes met in surprise, they acted simultaneously. The tigress sprang with a nerve shattering roar, while Anderson ducked down again, at the same moment contracting his trigger finger of his rifle. There was a heavy blast that sounded from the rifle, which went off only a few inches from his ears, together formed with the demoniacal roar of the tigress, still haunted him later in his life and made him shiver with fear. The brute had not anticipated the presence of the ledge behind which he was sheltering, and the blast and blinding flash of the rifle hit the tigress full in her face, evidently thrown off balance by this unexpected event, which deflected her aim, diverging her purpose from slaughter to escape. She leapt right over his head, and in passing, her hind foot caught the muzzle of the rifle, gave it a raking blow so that it was torn from his grasp, and went slithering down butt first the sloping rock and fell dully on the soft sand where it lay beside the half eaten corpse. Quicker than the rifle itself, the tigress herself reached the Nala bed, and in 2 bounds and another coughing roar was lost to view in the thickets of the opposite bank. He was totally shocked and hardly aware of what had happened. Then he realized that he was unarmed and helpless, and that if the tigress decided to return on her tracks and came looking for him, there was just nothing he could do. At the same time, to go down and collect the rifle would undoubtedly single him out for attack if the animal were lying wounded in the bushes of the opposite bank. But he thought that anything would be better than indecision and helplessness, and he dived down the slope to retrieve the rifle and scramble back, expecting at each second to hear the awful roar of the attacking killer. But nothing happened, and in less time than it takes to tell, he was back at the ledge. He did a quick examination of his rifle and found out that no damage was done to it in its fall. The stock absorbed all the shock. He replaced the spent cartridge. Then he started wondering whether he had hit the tigress at all, or if he had missed her at ridiculously close range. So, guys, this is where I come to the end of the first part of my story, The Jowlagiri Man-Eater by Kenneth Anderson. If you have not subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe, and thank you for listening, and bye for now.